Hi, I'm Tom Turner, Executive Director of the American Bonanza Society's Air Safety Foundation. Our guests this time are Doug Cummins and Jay Mills. Doug owns a V-35B Bonanza, and the two were flying together recently when they encountered a turkey vulture and recovered quite nicely from it. And so they've offered very generously to tell us about their experience so that we might be prepared if something like this happens to us. So Doug and Jay, thank you both very much for being here. And to get the ball rolling here, Doug, tell us a little bit about yourself and your flying background and anything else that you'd like us to know about you.
Well, my name's Doug Cummins, and I've been flying since I was a kid. My dad and grandpa were both pilots as well, and my grandpa had a Bonanza when I was a child, so I've been used to Bonanzas for a long time. Two friends of mine and I bought this Bonanza. It's a 1977 V-35B back in 2019, shortly before the pandemic hit, and we've been flying it ever since. My background, I'm a flight instructor and a airline pilot as well. I owned a FBO at New Kent County Airport just east of Richmond for about 6 years during a furlough from the airlines, and we ended up becoming a 141 flight school, and I was the chief instructor there, and I've stayed active in GA flying ever since I was a teenager. I got my private pilot's license in high school.
Great, that's fantastic, and we may a little later in the conversation come back to that this event from the through the eyes of a flight instructor as well. Jay Mills, you were a passenger on the airplane. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and how you happened to be flying with Doug that day?
Sure. So my background is I'm from Virginia. I don't have anywhere near the accomplishments in aviation that Doug has. So I'm just a private pilot in that context. I've been in the airline industry about 25 years. And so I met Doug years and years ago when I was working in customer service for the same airline. And then a few years after that, I got my private pilot's license a long time ago, but I wasn't current. So when Doug had started his flight school, I was married and I wanted to take my wife flying, but because she had never experienced general aviation. She'd never been in a small airplane. So I got current and I was flying out at Doug's flight school when he was running his flight school operation. Fast forward some years later, I got my dispatch license, and now I'm a flight dispatcher for the same airline that Doug is a captain at. And so he and I have reconnected and stayed in touch. And we catch up from time to time. We go to lunch, and we were just talking about flying, and that really I hadn't been involved in general aviation in a little while, and he invited me to go flying with him in his Bonanza.
All right, and so you chose that particular day to do it. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, Doug, and again, Jay, jump in whenever you want, and we will come back to you specifically in a bit to get your viewpoint on all this as well. But Doug, tell us just the basic setup, where you were going, what you were planning on doing, everything up to the point where you had the bird strike.
Okay. Well, Jay and I decided that we would fly from New Kent County Airport. It's about 9 miles east of Richmond International in Virginia. We decided we'd just take a short flight over to Williamsburg, Virginia, where they have a good airport restaurant. It's maybe 15 minutes or so on a Bonanza, flight I've done many times. So this was Thursday, September 25th, and the weather was good. There were high overcast clouds, light winds, and good visibility. So we taxied and took off on runway 29, which kind of heads directly towards Richmond, and we did a left downwind departure, stayed below the Class Charlie airspace in Richmond, and once we were clear of that, started climbing up to 2,000 feet. That seemed like a good altitude for a short flight over for lunch. And, while we were climbing, Jay mentioned that he hadn't flown in an airplane before with the single control yoke. And I said, oh, well, as soon as we level off, I'll turn the autopilot on and flip the yoke over to your side so you can, see how it works. So that was that was how everything got started.
All right. So, and Jay, from your viewpoint, what did you expect for this flight up to this point?
So I recall pretty much everything the same as Doug. The only thing that I was thinking about was that morning, he and I were texting, and the forecast had maybe mentioned the chance of some convective weather that afternoon or that evening. So we were texting about what time we would meet up. For the most part, we had agreed earlier, but Doug also had another aviation-related thing he needed to take care of that morning. So When we were looking at the weather forecast, we were texting back and forth, and then he's like, "Hey, you know what? This should work out good if we can go around 1:30. I'm gonna go take care of this other responsibility I have, and then meet me in New Kent." So we did that, and then just like you said, the weather turned out to be really great, not an issue at all. We figured like even if it did, we would be over to Williamsburg and back before that ever became an issue. And all said and done, the weather never even touched Richmond at all in that context. I was just enjoying the experience and looking at the Bonanzas because I'd never been in one.
Okay.
And then I was also looking at the avionics. And when we were just clear of the Class C, we started climbing. That's a Garmin I think you have, Doug. Is that right?
Right. It's a Garmin 530.
Okay. So the last time I looked at a Garmin, it wasn't a 530. It was a long time ago, but it wasn't that sophisticated. So I was just like curious about it. And I think I asked him a question about that as well, as we were talking about, the single yoke. And I looked at the Garmin, I looked out at the wing, looked back at the Garmin, and I was like, you can display the Class C on the Garmin, etc., in traffic as well. And he was like, yeah. Then we talked a little about ForeFlight. And then just as he's mentioned, because he's done this flight so many times, he didn't really need ForeFlight or the Garmin to get from New Kent to Williamsburg, right? But for myself, from a perspective of somebody coming back to general aviation, having not flown probably in about 8 years, maybe 9 years. So I was like, okay, for me, I still need to look at things to know exactly where I'm going, right? So that's why I was just kind of asking that question in that frame of reference, kind of as looking outside, looking for visual references, checkpoints, etc. And I remember looking down at the Garmin one more time and looking at it, and then looking up just kind of like that. And at that point, that's when the windscreen was just full of those turkey vultures.
Okay, that was it. All right, Doug. So, were you just leveling off? Were you in cruise flight? What altitude you were at? Take us from where we were before. You've gone off on this flight. You're talking about the throw-over yoke. You're talking about the avionics. You're reintroducing Jay to the current state of general aviation. And all of a sudden, this happens. So everything from basically that, where are you at this time? What altitude? What are you doing? And describe the actual impact.
Well, we were just leveling off at 2,000 feet. It's such a short flight, there wasn't really any need to go higher. So it just started leveling off, and I remember putting my hand up on the glare shield, and the autopilot is top center on our instrument panel in this plane. So I was putting my hand up there to get ready to turn the autopilot on because I was going to flip the yoke over to show Jay how that worked. And just as I put my hand up there, I remember seeing, I think, 3
Oh, 3. Yeah.
Did you see 3? Yeah.
3.
All right, it's a significant event for Jay. He knows it was 3.
And I mean, it was just that fast. I saw him, and then I remember it just being really loud. And I thought, oh boy, it's hit us and come through the windshield. I don't remember, a lot of super details right after it happened, but I think I made a big power reduction, maybe because of all the noise and the wind and stuff. But the forward visibility was very restricted because the glare shield had flipped up and was completely blocking my view. I remember, thinking, okay, the plane's flying normally. That's a good thing. And I looked at the altimeter and it showed 6,000, 6,500 feet, something like that. And I knew there was no way we'd gone up 4,000 feet in just a very short time. It also, I don't remember the details, but I think the airspeed didn't seem to be accurate, and I thought, I'm just going to disregard that. The turn coordinator also was showing a hard left turn. We were mostly level. So I started a left turn back towards New Kent, and it looked, was trying to look underneath the glare shield and above the instrument panel, and I noticed we had gotten a fair amount lower, probably from the big power reduction I made. So I added a lot of power. I don't remember specifically looking at the manifold pressure or anything like that, but I pushed the throttle way in and thought, I'm just going to fly this strictly visually because I don't know which instruments are working correctly, which ones aren't. So I was looking outside and I thought, I've got thousands of hours flying just right around this local area. But with the visibility so restricted, with just a small area that I could see, it was kind of hard to figure out exactly where we were, and which way I needed to fly back to the airport. So I reached up and I was going to put direct to New Kent in the Garmin. And for some reason, I wasn't having any luck dialing it in. The letters weren't coming up as I expected at all. Later found out my wrist was broken, which probably had something to do with that. But so I thought, never mind, I'll just, I need to just aviate and fly the airplane and head back to the airport. About that time, I noticed that there was quite a bit of blood. Jay was bleeding a lot. I was bleeding quite a bit, and I thought, I just need to get us back to the airport and get on the ground.
Okay. All right. Great. All right. So the impact itself, you saw the birds, you saw the vultures out ahead of you, but it was primarily the wind and the noise. There wasn't any. Did you feel any impact? Or the primary senses you felt were the wind and the noise, right?
I'd say mostly the noise.
The,
I kind of think the glare shield being wedged like it was in the windshield was cutting back on the wind a lot. I think, if I remember correctly, my sunglasses got knocked off.
okay.
So did my headset. But I don't recall having any trouble seeing.
Okay.
I don't think the wind was so strong that it was messing with my vision. But no, I don't remember the airplane flying different.
And again, the fact that the glare shield was pushed up and was obstructing your vision was actually probably helping quite a bit reduce the force of wind against you directly.
Yes, I think so.
Okay, great. Jay, you're sitting here just looking out here. You see three vultures ahead of you, and describe to me what you felt at the moment of impact.
So I think my first initial reaction was that they were going to go through the propeller or we were going to hit them in the propeller. It was difficult looking back on it to judge, I think, how closer, if they were exactly in front of the propeller or behind it, except, that sort of thing. Because, like I said, I was really looking down, heads down, and I look up, and they were large birds. So they took up most of the windscreen. The three of them took up most of looking out like straight ahead. And as they hit, the next thought I thought was, I really did not expect it to come through the windshield. I thought it was probably going to be like a big thud and maybe a mess. But when it came all the way through, and so when it's like, again, it happened so fast, but kind of replaying in my mind, it was just like, okay, wow. So I don't know what cut me. I don't know if it was the glare shield or part of the windshield, but as soon as whatever hit me and cut me, it cut me immediately, and it cut pretty deep. So I felt the impact of whatever that was, and then just blood.
All right, so I cut you on your head, right?
Yeah, it cut me on my head. The initial cut was so much blood that I couldn't see out my right eye. So I was kind of like doing this, looking out at Doug, and then I kind of looked out this way, and I have not been in a fight since really like middle school, but that's the best way I could describe the impact of the shock the first time you get punched really hard.
Mm-hmm.
It was kind of like that of like, wow, that really hurt.
All right, and so what's your first thought about Doug's ability to handle what's going on here at this point?
Outstanding.
Outstanding. Okay.
Outstanding.
So you had full confidence in him being able to take care of the situation here.
Yes, I did. Yeah, I did.
And as a private pilot, maybe not a terribly current pilot, but as a private pilot, was your response, "Hey, I want to help," or is it like, "Get out of the way," or what were you thinking?
I want to help, yes, but in hindsight, all things being equal, my response and my reactions were way, as they say, you have to stay in front of the airplane. Mine were way behind the airplane and way behind Doug.
Doug, did you feel like you were ahead of it, or was there a moment of shock or the startle effect, as they call it? Did you have a period of time where it took you a moment to assess what was going on before you could start to develop a plan of action?
I knew pretty quickly I needed to get back to the airport, and the airplane, I could tell right away, was flying fine. I mean, the ailerons worked normally, pitch, all that was completely normal. But yeah, my focus was really getting on the ground, because I noticed fairly quickly on that I was bleeding quite a bit. And I have since found out that blood is kind of like a few drops of oil on an engine. A few drops look like a really bad leak, but it's really not that bad. And fortunately, I didn't have any significant blood loss, but at the time I didn't know it, and I thought, I wonder if I need to get on the ground quick, if there's any chance I might pass out or get groggy or something like that. Turns out that wasn't an issue, but I didn't know that at the time. Of course, you don't have a mirror to look in, and I just knew that I had some blood on me.
Okay, so where actually were you cut at? Was it on your forehead also, or? I
had a puncture wound up on my forehead that the ER doctor actually thinks was caused by the talon, perhaps, of the vulture.
Okay.
She said it was not consistent with like a plexiglass cut.
Okay.
The other thing I think it might have been, we have those rosin sun visors.
Yes.
And it completely shattered the plastic on it. but I think maybe the arm could have come back and hit me in the forehead.
And you said you also broke your wrist. How do you think that happened?
Well, I've got two ideas. I'm not 100% sure. One would just be that I raised it reflexively, to protect my face. The other thought was I'm pretty sure I just sat it on the glare shield right before it happened, and I think the glare shield may be snapping up vertically.
Okay, I think that's a flight instructor thing. You've got to put your hands somewhere. I do that too. You said so when you're not using it, you've got to put it somewhere. So all right, great. So was New Kent, was that the closest? How far away were you from the airport at the time?
I don't know, 6 or 7 miles.
Okay, real
Not
close.
far. So yeah, going back to New Kent seemed to make the most amount of sense. So I turned, kind of in the general direction, and after messing with the GPS for a short time and deciding I was just going to do it visually, I just continued flying until I saw Interstate 64, which parallels the runway at New Kent. So once I saw 64, I just turned left and followed it into the airport.
Is New Kent tower controlled, non-towered? How is it?
No, it's a very quiet, uncontrolled airport.
Good. All right, so now you're at 2,000 feet. You're probably about, almost that high above field elevation at that point. What's your field elevation?
Yeah, it's near sea level, 120 feet or so.
Yeah, 100. Yes, good, about 100. Okay, so you're about 2,000 feet above the ground. You're 6 miles away from the airport. You really can't see out the front of the airplane. You and your passenger are injured. Did you attempt to communicate with anyone outside of the airplane? And how did you plan and how did you execute your return to the airport?
Yeah, I did. I made 2 Mayday calls. It's the first time in flying I've declared emergencies before, but I've never actually used Mayday. But it seemed like this was an appropriate time. So I made 2 Mayday calls, said that we were returning to New Kent, damaged from a bird strike with injuries, and that if anybody could hear me, if they could please send crash fire rescue to New Kent. My headset got smashed pretty bad. So my first thing, I reached down to try to pick my headset up, and it was in pieces. So I used the hand mic instead. And I suspected nobody would be able to hear me with all the wind. But so I made the Mayday call, and then once I saw 64 and got turned in for the runway, I made another call and added that we'd be straight in for runway 29. Yeah, on 22.8. I didn't bother switching to anything else.
All right, so now you're following the highway back to the airport. You have a positive way to get back there. Describe how the airplane felt and how you maneuvered at each phase of the pattern.
Well, the airplane, it flew perfectly normally, other than it took a lot of power. Makes sense because there was a lot of extra drag there. But I know a couple times I gave Jay a thumbs up and I tried yelling at him, the airplane's flying okay, but he couldn't hear me. So I started following the interstate in, and I put the gear down, and I was a little worried when the gear was coming down. I thought, what am I going to do if I don't get 3 green lights? Am I just going to belly it in? Do I need to get it on the ground that quickly, or am I going to try to stay up here and troubleshoot? Fortunately, the gear worked just fine. We got 3 green lights, and I don't know, about 4 or 5 miles out, I remembered 7700 squawk, and I punched that into the transponder, and we just landed straight in at New Kent. Like I said, I really decided I just wasn't going to pay any attention to the instruments because I didn't know what was working and what wasn't. So I just pretty much did it by feel. I didn't put the flaps down. I don't think it was really a conscious decision. I just put the gear down and just landed. I do remember pushing the prop forward on final, the prop control, and thinking that it's forward, but I don't think I'm going to go around if there's any way around it. So we made a no-flap landing and made the second turn off from the end. So it's about 3,500 foot runway. So got slowed down with plenty of room left. Turned off the runway and came to a stop. And my first thought was, okay, you got down safely. Don't retract the gear, retract the flaps. And so I moved the flap handle up, and like I said, I hadn't put the flaps down anyway, but it was just kind of habit. And I made another call on the radio that we were down safely, and if anybody heard us, we still needed an ambulance. And then we taxied up to the terminal, and it taxied perfectly normally.
Great. All right, Jay. So you're out here. Let's back up a little bit. This has happened. You're bleeding. He's injured. The wind's blowing in. First thought going through your head was probably, I'm glad you didn't get the yoke thrown over first. But as you're coming down, were you able to do anything to help? What were you doing able to do anything to help? And what did you feel like as Doug is getting your airplane back on the ground?
So by the time I started to, I think, recognize that things need to be done, Doug had already done all those things anyway, right? Which is good. So the first thing I realized, like when he said like he knew, or I felt confident he was really on top of it. As I looked out the corner, this way, wings are straight and level. We had descended some, but I didn't know how much, but I could tell we had descended some. And then, just like you said, from when I was flying there with him as a student, the flight school, etc., and flying on my own, 64 is a great landmark to kind of gauge where you're at. You have 64, you have the horse track, and then there's like a landfill out there. And there's, I believe, some sort of penitentiary or whatever. So I looked off this way. I could see 64, and I could see the penitentiary. And then we turned left, so I was like, okay, we're heading in the right direction, right?
Okay, good.
And then he was telling me kind of what he was doing, but like he said, it was very hard to hear. So I was just giving him a thumbs up when I understood and a nod when he would say something. Because me trying to talk back, I couldn't really talk over it. So he's like, we're okay, the airplane's flying good. So
Okay.
that was kind of the thing.
Good.
And then when we turned on final, or when we, like you say, it was basically straight in, but when we got on final, he was like, I need you to hold the windscreen up just so I can see good. Because it was like taking up the entire windscreen, basically. So I held it in place, and there was like a little gap above the dash and this thing so he could see the actual runway. So I held that in place so it wasn't flapping, and he looked and brought
That's
it right
great.
on in.
I'm sure that was extremely helpful. Great. There was some feathers way back in the baggage compartment on the hat shelf back there. It looked like how much bird material came into the cabin, do you know? Was there a
The
lot
entire
of
bird was in the baggage compartment.
The entire bird came back there.
Yeah, when we went back to the airport after the emergency room, the bird was just sitting in the baggage compartment. He really looked fine. I mean, he was dead, but he
Other
looked fine.
than that.
It wasn't cut up or anything like that.
Okay. Just came through like a cannonball. Okay.
Yeah,
great.
weighed a little bit less than like a gallon of milk. So he definitely had some weight to him, but
Yeah.
I felt bad for the...
Oh, definitely. Was there any other damage to the aircraft, or was it limited just basically to the windscreen and the panel?
We don't have a shop at New Kent, so we haven't had too much luck getting much done at this point. But the windshield obviously is destroyed.
Yeah.
The glare shield is very badly damaged, and I think it'll need to be replaced. It basically got folded in half and wedged into the area where the windshield broke. The compass on top of the glare shield is completely smashed. The instrument panel is bent significantly. The autopilot control unit, the cable in the back is going in at about a 45-degree angle instead of horizontally, so that's messed up. The audio panel is actually bent. That thing's big. How it got bent, I don't know, but it's actually bent. The turn coordinator's stuck in a hard left turn and makes a terrible grinding sound if you turn the plane on. And then the vent in the back of the hat rack, the exhaust vent, seems to be damaged. I think it'll need to be replaced.
Did you have the hull insured? Are you working with insurance on this?
Yeah. They're hoping that we can find what we're hoping right now. We've got a couple local mechanics at the airport that are friends of mine, and we're hoping that they can replace the windshield and get us a ferry permit so that we can fly it to another shop for the
Good.
remainder of the repairs. And we just had the plane's got a lot of blood and feathers and bird parts and stuff in it, and I started calling a bunch of different hazmat, biohazard cleaning places, and I probably called 5 or 6, and nobody wanted to deal with an airplane except one. So they just came out this morning and gave us an estimate of $4,000 to clean and disinfect the inside of the aircraft. So we just sent that off to the insurance company to see what what their thoughts were on that.
Right.
But,
Jay reacted to that.
I didn't think it would be. I mean, I didn't have an idea of what it was going to be, but
Yeah,
I didn't.
That
think
seems
it
like
would be
that.
much. But
that seems
yeah,
like a
that's
lot
a
of money.
lot.
a lot. But they said since there's a combination of human and animal blood in it, they have different standards they have to follow.
Okay.
Okay.
But it looks like you've got several challenges, but your intent is to get the Bonanza flying again, so that's good.
Yes, I believe it's.
And was your wrist a pretty clean break? I mean, is it going to heal up all right?
Yeah, it should heal okay. They called it a
Great.
chauffeur's fracture. I
All
guess back in the day when you had to crank a car to start it. Sometimes they would kick back and break the chauffeur's wrist. So they said that's how my wrist is broken. But they said it'll probably heal up in like 6 to 8 weeks. It's been 2.5, so well underway.
And Jay, are you going to keep flying, or has this kind of turned you off? Or
No. I plan to keep flying.
Great.
I think the biggest thing that this reinforced for me is that there's definitely different levels to experience, or however you like to say that. But in terms of, there's no shortcut or substitution for experience in the context of, in this scenario, from a ATP to a private pilot, handling the situation. So when I tell my friends about it who don't fly at all, if I'm just explaining it to them, and they ask me what I would have done if I'm by myself, my answer is, well, I'd been much more comfortable if I was higher, if I was at like 5,000 or 6,000 feet. Not really necessary for our trip, but from my perspective of looking at how long it took me to catch up to what needed to be done, that's important to have that safety margin of time to process, to aviate, navigate, communicate, etc. If I was by myself at 2,000 feet in that same airplane, etc., I'm not sure if it's the same out.
Well, I hope it would be.
I mean, I hope so.
Yeah, well, obviously you do, but yeah.
Yeah. But
yeah, I get what you're saying.
Yeah, the timeliness of things that need to be done, an assessment of what needs to be done, because I think about, like, just if you're the shock for me is the first thing, right? I've never experienced a bird strike. I've read articles about bird strikes, etc., aircraft incidents. I've talked to crews in my role as a dispatcher when they call me. So as a dispatcher, we have this function with the crews where they can call either SATCOM or radio, and we'll do a patch with maintenance or whoever needed to talk to help them resolve the issue. But that's sitting very comfortably at a desk on the ground. That's very different than experiencing a potential emergency real time in the air.
But having watched a professional pilot work through an emergency like this, what do you as a private pilot learn about the response to any sort of an emergency?
I think the first thing is just the aviate piece of it. So you have to get an immediate state of, is the airplane still airworthy? Whatever happened, what did it do? How much did it change? Like your attitude, your airspeed, etc., those things. And then make the necessary adjustments to get the airplane back to straight and level or whatever you need to do. What mechanical issues do you potentially have if something like that happened? And then where are you going and what, who you need to tell.
Well, Doug, as a flight instructor, that was a great lesson you gave him. So that's good. Doug, how long have you been an airline pilot?
Since 1990.
Okay, quite some time. Yeah, it's been a while there. Okay. Was there anything specific from your airline experience that went through your head as you're processing this event?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I didn't, at the time, I didn't think so much about it, but looking back on it now, we practice so many different emergencies in the simulator, and fortunately they don't happen too often in real life, but in the simulator it's all the time. And it almost just was like, okay, this is the emergency we're doing today, and we got to, deal with it and get it done. Having practiced, such a variety of different emergencies. I mean, we don't do a bird through the windshield in the simulator, but it was just helpful having experienced a lot of other situations. This was almost just like another emergency drill that I needed to get through.
Great. And as a flight instructor, Jay's already talked about some of what he's learned, but are you still a practicing flight instructor, or have you kind of put that
Very
aside
rarely.
for a while?
Occasionally I'll do a flight review or something like that.
But as a flight instructor, has this added something to what you might mention to someone in a flight review, or has this changed in any way how you might present emergency procedures review in a general aviation airplane?
Oh, that's a good question.
Haven't really processed that yet.
Yeah, I haven't thought a whole lot on that, but I think and everybody says it, but the big thing is you got to fly the airplane first. Like I said, I started messing with the GPS for a little bit and thought, no, there's no reason to do that. I didn't want to, when I made the emergency call, I knew I wouldn't be able to hear a response because I didn't have my headset on, and I wasn't going to bother trying to find the speaker button that we don't use that often, on the audio panel. I could have heard it anyway, but I didn't want to spend too much time on anything other than the aviating part.
Great.
One thing I would do in the future, if you were taking anybody up with any sort of flying experience, probably not somebody that had never flown, but I think it would be a good idea to show them how to flip the yoke over before departure. Because if I'd have been incapacitated somehow, it would have been good for Jay to know how to flip that yoke over, so that he could fly the airplane. So that's one thing I would do in the future.
That reminded me. Do you happen to wear contacts?
I don't.
Okay, no, correct. Lucky you. I was just thinking one of the things you said that happened, and I've heard this in other cases, is that your glasses were knocked off. Your sunglasses, in your case, were knocked off. I've always carried, like, when I get a new set of glasses, I carry the last set of glasses in my flight bag up here where I can get to it just in case I need an emergency. We'll wrap it up here then. Is there anything that we didn't talk about here that either one of you would like to discuss, or any last wrap-up? I'll let Jay start this as passenger in command of this event here. Any last thoughts about this process or this event, or anything else you'd like to talk about?
I think my biggest takeaway has just been that, the reinforcement of, staying, if you want to fly, staying proficient, thinking about different things in terms of scenarios that potentially could happen, even though they don't happen very often, just having a plan in mind. And then just like Doug said, just reinforcing, remember, fly the airplane.
Excellent. And Doug, any last thoughts or anything else you'd like to talk about?
When I was actively instructing, before I would solo a student in the in a 172 or 152, there were a couple things I would always do. I would put my arm behind him and at some point flip the window open, so there'd be a bit of a distraction, Another thing I would do, usually on downwind, I would hold up the rental book and I would block their view of all the six-pack instruments and have them land the airplane strictly visually looking outside. I think that's important to be comfortable doing that, because in this case, you always hear trust your instruments, but that's not always. Normally, I think that's great advice, but in this particular case, it probably wasn't. And I think being fairly comfortable flying the airplane, just looking outside, is a good thing to have, a good ability to have.
Great. Well, Doug Cummins and Jay Mills, thank you both very much for sharing your experience, because I'm sure there are going to be ABS members out there that are going to listen to this and think about how they might respond to a situation like this or some other emergency, and be better for it having heard what you've done. So I really appreciate you being a guest here, and thank you very much. Glad it worked out great.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks, Tom.
I hope you both get back in the air and you get the Bonanza back in the air very quickly.
Thank you.